So today's daf is daf Lamed, and we're up to Amalei Rav Rav Nosson Bar Ami Adiyodcha al Tzavore Debrech. Literally, as long as your arm is over the neck of your son, meaning you have tkifus and your sholet olav, you should be zar lo chicho, you should give him tochacha. And what exactly is that time period? It's from, according to one man, the Yomer Shitzar Viad Esrim Vitarte, from 16 to 22. So that's the first opinion, 16 to 22. And Amri, according to second opinion, it's the Amri Srei from 18 until 24. Now, it's not clear whether this machlokas has anything to do with the previous sugya about marrying off your son, or it's just an independent sugya about tochacha. And the Tosri Azokin speaks about Yodchal Tzavari Debrech, meaning that you're allowed to hit your son. However, this is very difficult because of the sugya Moikot Yud Zayin of Lifnei Iver Lo Sitei Michshol, that your son, if he's mature, he might be tempted to hit you back. Kitanoi. These two Lashonos in Rava are really parallel to a machlokas Tanoim in terms of how to interpret the pasuk Chanoch Lenar al pi darko. Gam ki yazkin lo yosur mimenu. What is the age for tochacha? And the Brisa records the following machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemiah. According to one opinion, Mishitzar Biad Esrim V'Tartin from 16 to 22, and Chanomar Mitam Nisrai from 18 Biad Esrim V'Arba till 24. And you may recall that with regard to marrying off your son, 24 is like the upper limit because after that, Tipech Hatzmoso. Ad Hechon, this is today's sugya, Chayav Adam L'Lamed Espino Torah. How much of a scope of Torah study is included in the father's obligation vis-a-vis his son? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul could go in Zvulun ben Dan. In the case of Zvulun ben Dan, who is learning Torah at the feet of his grandfather, and the chiyuv to teach your son is on the father vis-a-vis his son, but Zvulun ben Dan studied at the feet of the father of his father, Shalimdo Avi Aviv, and what was the scope? It was number 1, Mikra, number 2, Mishnah, number 3, Talmud, and number 4, Halachas, and 5 is Agados. Basically, the chiyuv to teach Torah encompasses all the various disciplines of Torah study. So the Gemara asks a stira from a brisa, Meisvei limdo mikra, ein melamdo mishnah. A father teaches his son mikra, and with that he fulfills his obligation. He's not obligated to go beyond mikra. Vi amar Rava, mikra zo Torah. It means that mikra is referring to Torah. Torah means chamisha chumshei Torah. And that means that according to Rava, in his understanding of the Brisa, even Tanakh, even Nevi'im and Ksuvim, a father is not obligated to teach his son. And the Pnei Yoshua adds that the reason why the Gemara quotes this explanation of Rava is to make this question even sharper, that Rava limits the scope of the obligation of the father to Torah and excludes Nevi'im and Ksuvim. How much more so all the other 4 disciplines of Torah study? And the Gemara answers, Kizvulun ben Dan v'lo Kizvulun ben Dan. Yes, there are 2 questions involved and implicit in Hadhechon Chayav Ha'adam L'Lamed Espino Torah. One is the scope, how much Torah and how many disciplines you have to teach your son. And the other is how many generations down the line. What we're going to derive from the paradigm of Zvulun ben Dan is only an answer to the question of how many generations down the line. Kizvulin pendan shalimdo avi aviv, which means that a grandfather has to teach his grandson Torah. But v'lo kizvulin pendan, but we're not going to derive the hekef, the scope of the disciplines of Torah that are obligatory within the context of Talmud Torah from Zvulun ben Dan to Ilu Hasam. In the case of the grandfather of Zvulun ben Dan, he taught his grandson Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, Halachas, Fagodas, V'ilu Hacha. With regard to the chiyuv of the father to teach his son, there he's only chayav l'lamdo Mikra bilvad. And this is the answer to the Gemara's question at Heichon Chayev Adam L'Lamed Benot Torah, meaning how many generations down the line does a person have to teach Torah? And that's what Shmuel mentioned and answered Kigon Zvulun ben Dan, that one has to teach even Bnei Banov, even his grandson. Like we find, for example, that Yaakov Avinu taught the children of Yosef, his grandchildren. And as far as the actual scope of the learning and how much a father has to teach his son, that we're going to derive from the Brisa, that the father is not chayav to teach his son more than Mikra. Even though in the case of Zvulun ben Dan, his grandfather taught him 5 different disciplines, the entire gamut of Torah. However, the Chinuch in Mitzvah Tov Yutes has a different twist on this Gemara. He interprets it that Kizvulun ben Dan means that his grandfather taught him Mikra, which means Torah. But lo Kizvulun ben Dan, not like the Zvulun ben Dan situation where the grandfather taught his grandson only Mikra. But really, as far as the chiyuv of teaching one's son Torah and what's included in the scope, the Gemara is not committed to limit that to just Mikra. Now, in Shulchan Aruch Yerodei Siman Reish Mem Hey, the Mechaber paskins that when it says that a father only has to teach his son Mikra, that's only in a case of a father who's very pressured, which is called in the language of Shulchan Aruch Sha'a Dechukalo. He doesn't have pnai, he doesn't have free time to study personally with his father, and therefore he will have to hire a teacher for his son. So the father doesn't have time to dedicate to the Torah study of his son. But ima dover biyado, if his father has free time, then chayav l'lamdo Mishnah, Talmud, Halachas, V'Agadas. So we see clearly that this sugya is really, really a broad sugya. You know, we can't just read the Gemara and walk away with the wrong impressions. The Gemara now raises the following question: why does Shmuel derive conclusions about how many generations down the line you have to teach Torah from the case of Zvulun ben Dan? So the Brisa explicitly says you don't have to teach your grandchildren. So why is Shmuel deriving conclusions from Zvulun ben Dan? The Brisa continues. Umani Makai, but what about the pasuk in Dvarim Perek Dalid, Vodato levanecha v'livnei vanecha, which indicates clearly that you have to teach your grandchildren. Lomar lecha, and in fact the Brisa derives from this pasuk, Shekol Malamed is Benot Torah, Malalov HaKosek Ki Limdo Lo Ulibno Uliben Beno Ad Sof Kol Doros. So it means if you teach Torah to your children, then it's considered as if you taught Torah and it was transmitted through all the generations. And the Gemara answers that as far as Shmuel is concerned, who derived the conclusion and established the principle that a grandfather has to teach Torah to his grandson, who the Yomi Aitana, he, Shmuel, was standing on the shoulders of a different Tana, a different Brisa that had a dissenting view, and did not derive from B'neichem the exclusion of B'nei B'neichem. And Desanya v'limanitem osam esmechem ainli ella B'neichem, B'nei B'neichem minayin, Talmud lomar, v'odato levanecha v'livnei vanecha. It teaches us that a grandfather has to teach his grandson. So why did the Torah use the language of a mute of B'neichem, which according to the first Brisa excludes B'nei B'neichem, And the Gemara answers, B'neichem v'lo b'nosechem. It's only coming to exclude the women folk. You don't have to teach the women folk the daughters Torah. Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Torah, a person who teaches a grandson Torah. Now, most commentaries will say that the grandson is ki'ilu kibla me'ar Sinai. Why? Because he goes back to an earlier generation, meaning the Mesoras HaTorah now from the grandfather to the grandson indicates that the grandson is now closer to Maimon Har Sinai. He gets an earlier, more original Mesoras HaTorah. However, other commentaries understand that Ki'ilu Kibla Me'ar Sinai is a reference to the grandfather. And when the grandfather passes on and transmits the Torah to his grandson, he gains the Maila of Kibla Me'ar Sinai. And the reason for this, he quotes the Sefer HaMakneh, which is a super commentary on Masechet Kiddushin, Mishum, Sharei Eino Doma Adam HaShomea Mipi Harav LaAdam HaShomea Mi Talmud. And it means V'yafgav de'oviv gam kein chayv l'lamto, but the kirva tar Sinai is dafka in this situation. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Ashkechel Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Shodi Disna Reshe. He noticed, Rabbi Chia, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was wearing a sadin. It's a kind of a covering over his head that indicates that he's chashuv, that he's someone very significant. And he would not go Begili Rosh. And he says here, in the name of various commentaries, he so this disna is not really the perfect way of covering one's head, which is called lisate pesudar, but he was apparently in a rush, and therefore Yeshua ben Levi sufficed with shadi disna. He put just like a sheet around his head. And he would take his son to the Beis HaKnesses to study Torah. Amalei, so Rav Chia turns to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and he asks him, "My kulei hai, why this rush to take your son with urgency to study Torah in the Beis HaKnesses, and you're not even willing to wait that extra few seconds to dress and cover your head the way you should be?" Amalei, so Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi responded, "Mi zutar, is it a davar katan beinecha? Is it very insignificant in your eyes? My dechsiv al datam ne'amenecha v'samach le'yom asher amaltot ne'Hashem malkech b'choreh." In other words, anyone who teaches his son Torah, it's as if he received the Torah from Har Sinai. So I was urgently trying to be Mekayim, this great mitzvah. The Gemara tells us, Mikan v'elech, from that story and on, Rabbi Chia bar Abba lo toim umtza. He would never eat even a small amount of basar. Umtza means barbecued meat. And again, back in the day, they used to eat barbecued meat in the morning. Until he would study with his young child that what they learned yesterday, and then mosfe they would add and go beyond new things. And so too we find that Rabbah did not eat until he took his son to the Beis Medrash. That's how significant the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is. Amar of Safra Mishum V'Shuv Chanani Mai Dichsiv V'Shinanto L'Vanech Al Tikre V'Shinantom El V'Shilashtam. So this means that one should divide up his day into 3 different parts and study a different discipline of Torah in each of the 3 parts of the day. And what three disciplines are we talking about? Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud. So he should dedicate 1/3 of his day to Mishnah, to Mikra, another third of his day to Mishnah, which is what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, and finally, 1/3 of his day to Talmud, Lahotzi Davar Mitov Davar. And Li'olam Yishalish Adam Shnosav. Not only his daily schedule should allow for this 3-part study, but even the years of his life should be divided into 3/3. Shlish, the first third of his life, he should dedicate himself to Mikra, Shlish to Mishnah, and Shlish to Talmud. The Gemara asks the following kasha, Miyoda Kamichai. It's very nice if you know you're going to live to the age of 90, you divide up 90 by 3, and you get 30, 30, 30. But a person doesn't know up front how long he's going to live. Yomi. Therefore, we have to reinterpret this statement. It's not referring to the years of one's life. That's impossible, but rather to the days of the week. So it doesn't mean that we divide up each day into 3 segments, but rather we divide up the week. And that means 2, 2, and 2. The first 2 days of the week he should dedicate to Mikra, second to Mishnah, and the third to Talmud. So what does he do on Shabbos? I don't see it now, but if I'm not mistaken, on Shabbos he should sort of like review different parts of what he learned during that week. Maybe you have that in your commentary. I don't know where it disappeared here. Why were the Chachamim in the early generations called Sofrim, as the pasuk says in Divrei Yomi, u'mishpachos Sofrim Yoshvei Yabetz, Shayu Sofrim kol Osios Torah. They were such experts in the knowledge of Torah that they could count up the osios of the Torah. And they could tell you in every single part of the Torah how many osios there were. Shayu Omrim, and in terms of the entire Torah, meaning the 5 books of Moses, they could know how many letters there are in the entire book, and then they could tell you which letter is exactly in the middle of all the letters of the Torah, and that's called Vav de Gachon. That in the pasuk of Vayikra Yud Aleph, pasuk Mem Beis, Kol Holech Al Gachon, Chetzion Shel Osio Shel Sefer Torah. This is the midpoint of the letters of the Torah, and it's the Vav of Gachon. Lubavitch Rebbe has a lot of Torah on this. Anyway, Chetzion Shel Osio Shel Sefer Torah. Darosh Darash, in the pasuk, or a little bit earlier, 1 chapter earlier, Vayikra Yud, it says, V'eis Seir Achatos Darosh Darash Moshe, Chetzion Shel Tevos. So it means that the word Darosh is the middle teva of the Torah. It's the middle word of the Torah. And then in Vayikra Yud Gimel it says V'skalach V'snesek lo yigalech in the parasha of Mitzorah, and that's Chetzion Shel Psukim. So in other words, the Sofrim were able to count letters, to count words, and to count Psukim. And now, furthermore, we have a pasuk in Tehillim, Yichar Semena Chazir Miyar, Ayin Diyar, the ayin of the word Ya'ar, which is the second letter of 3, is Chetzion Shel Tehillim. So this is in chapter 80 of the Mizmari Tehillim, and it's exactly that ayin that's the middle of the osios of Tehillim. V'hu rachum yichaper avon. The pasuk in Tehillim Ayin Ches is Chetzion de Psukim. And it's interesting that the Gemara doesn't tell us what's the Chetzion Shel Tevos. And he says here the name of the Maribe Rav and the Shitul Anodolami, Mishum Shachachomim Asofrim Istapku B'Tevos Haluka Imhi Nechsheves Kishtei Tevos. So the Chachmei Sofrim were vacillating back and forth about the tevos of Halaluka. Is it 2 tevos or 1 teva? And therefore, he couldn't really tell you in a definitive way which is Chetzin Shel tevos. Boy, Rav Yosef of the Gocha mehai gisa. Does the vav, that 4th letter of the word the Gachon, 3rd letter of the word Gachon, is that part of the first half of the Torah or the second half of the Torah? So is the Vav of Gachon the last letter of the first half of the letters of the Torah, or it's the first letter of the second half of the letters of the Torah? And for some reason, the Gemara did not raise the possibility that the Vav of Gachon is exactly the middle letter. It's not part of the first half or the second half. Hayadualo, the Gemara says that Rav Yosef really knew, and he wasn't vacillating about the Mispar Osios HaTorah, that it was an even number. So therefore, it's impossible that there's a middle letter. Amalei Sabai responded, today we can do this by computer. But Abai didn't have access to computer. He says, let's take out a Sefer Torah, let's start counting the Osios, so we'll know which is where to place the Vav of Gachon. Milo Amar Rabba Bar Bachana. Didn't we find something similar in Rabba Bar Chana, that they had a doubt about the minyan of Osios? They actually opened up a Sefer Torah and they counted up the letters of the Sefer Torah. This is a reality. This actually happened. Amalei, Rav Yosef responded, Inu, the Chachamim of the earlier generations, Beki bechaseros v'yiseros, Vanan lo bekin. We can't open up a Sefer Torah and decide which is the middle letter of the Torah. We can't count the letters of the Torah because we don't know chaseros and yiseros. We don't know which words should have a mole and which should have a chaser. For example, he says, Yeshna milim shedinam likase b'ksiv mole, v'yeshna milim shechaser o yeser b'hem osios. And ksuvas and tzuras ksivason is nimsar l'Moshe miSinai. Somehow we lost the bekiyas, the knowledge, the expertise on chaseros and yiseros. Like, for example, it says, livnei pilag shim, and the yud before the mem is written in the Torah, in the Tanakh, but yet we read it without the yud, as if it said pilag sham without the yud. And that depends on the Masorah. We don't have a definitive Masorah. And that's what Yosef says, Anan lo bekin. Therefore, if you're going to count the letters of the Torah as we have it, it's very possible that we're missing a letter or there's an additional letter in our Sifrei Torah. Therefore, the Vav de Gachon is not in its proper place. Boy, Rav Yosef is Galach. You'd say that his Galach is Chetshon Shel Psukei Torah mehai giso by Psuke Mio Laisu Limnuye. Even though you told us that we're not Bekiyin in Chaseros and Yiseros, however, we are Bekiyim in the Psukim, and therefore we should be able to count Psukim. And Rav Yosef responds with Psukim Nami Lo Bekiyin. Even with regard to Psukim, we don't have the expertise. We lost that knowledge. Techi also Rav Acha Bar Ado me Eretz Yisrael Bavel Omar b'Maravi said be Eretz Yisrael Paski Leila Haikra Lislosa Litlosa Psuke. They divided up one single pasuk into 3 different psukim. It says Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Hinei Anochi Ba Elecha Ba'av Hanan, and that's where they're going to end the pasuk in Eretz Yisrael. And then it says Ba'avur Yishma Am B'Dabri Yimach V'Gam B'Cha Yamin Olam. And that's going to be a second pasuk. Not only that, by Yaged Moshe's Divrei Amel Hashem, that's going to be a third pasuk. So we don't have a definite tradition of Mesores that is precise to know exactly how to divide up the psukim of the Torah. And therefore we don't know the million of psukim. It won't help if we count psukim. Tana Rabbanu, we learned in the Brisa, Chameshes alafim u'shmona me'os u'shmonim u'shmona psukim hayu psukei Sefer Torah. The number of psukim in a Sefer Torah is equal to 5,888. Yeser of Tilim Shmona. And if you count not the psukim in the Torah, but the psukim in Sefer Tehillim, you'll find that you have to add another 8 psukim to the counting of the psukim of Tehillim. If you count the psukim of Divrei Yom, it'll be 8 minus the psukei Sefer Torah. We're missing 8 psukim. The word Vishinantav is interpreted as Shinun, with the lotion of Chidud, Mechudad b'ficha. That it's, you don't have to start calculating and remembering. It's right there, sharp on your mouth. If a person asks you a question, you shouldn't start stuttering. Oh, I don't know, maybe, yes, you should be able to answer him immediately. That's the standard shear for the mitzvah Vishinantav of studying the Torah. Shenemar, and now the Bryce is going to prove this from a pasuk in Mishlei.